Cumulus building once again in our corner of Texas. We had some storms in the area yesterday, and we're waiting to see if we're going to get the same for today. Here's how it looks on the satellite imagery. This is visible imagery, so we're basically seeing a measure of albedo, or the visible reflectance of these clouds, and cumulus is one of the best reflectors. You can also see that there's a motion from east to west. It's a very weak flow, but they are moving in that general direction, maybe a little bit northwest. Now let's take a look at what it looks like on infrared. Well, looks a whole lot different, doesn't it? That's because the cumulus clouds are relatively warm. They're kind of close to the temperature of the Earth's surface. So most of what we see here is going to be cirrus debris. However, right around here, it looks like there are kind of transitory features popping up here and there. You see a little bit of very white clouds, and then they disappear. That's evidence that some of the towers are kind of pulsing up into the mid-levels of the atmosphere and then dying off. So we'll have yet to see if we get anything out of that. In the western states, for this afternoon, it looks cooler. I'm seeing lots of 80s and even a few 70s. Look at that, 74 at Tonopah. That's quite a change, and it looks like we've had kind of a weak cool air mass develop over the central Rockies. Not a very much spatial extent. You can see back over Oregon and Washington, temperatures are coming up into the 90s, and we're expecting 97 in some of these desert areas of Washington. So the cool air not really helped them out much, but Portland and Seattle, those temperatures look pretty good. Also a cool air mass over the Great Lakes region, temperatures in the low 70s, very pleasant weather with light winds and some of that cold air flowing into the Midwest states. And we have a warm front in southern Nebraska. We have some chances for severe weather. I think there was a slight risk for the Omaha area right there. You can see the easterly flow that always helps in severe weather situations. And then further down the front in the Tennessee, Georgia area, just some cooler low 90s and 80s flowing southward. And then another chance for storms in Virginia near this warm front, very slight easterly component there in Virginia. And it's not so much the direction that's important. Even just kind of a light and variable wind field can help out your photographs. In the northeastern U.S., cold air advection, they get the cold air advection constantly. It's been a recurring theme for the past 2 years. And certainly climatologically, I think we're seeing a lot more ridges out west and troughs out east. So not much to say about that. We're going to focus here on weather. This is not really a climate program. And in Texas, there's that easterly flow. We do have the tropics open, a little bit of onshore component, and we're expecting to see the upper level ridge somewhere in this region. So before we take a look at that, let's head up north. A lot of your typical weather programs only like to focus on the United States, but as we know, a lot of our weather comes from the North Pacific, from Canada, and over the long term, even from Alaska. Well, Alaska looking pretty cool this afternoon. Little front up there in Yukon, and you can see this little warm wedge right there. That's a warm sector with temperatures in the mid-70s. So some warm air located there. And as you go west, you can see the thicknesses, those red dashed lines start to descend into lower thickness values, indicating a low mean temperature in the lower troposphere. And we've also got this little trough offshore. This is a cold air mass that's been pulled from the Gulf of Alaska into the northwestern regions, and it's kind of been sitting there over the past couple of days. And we got this little occluded low out there off the coast of British Columbia. And just a quick look out there in eastern Canada. Well, not much to say, but cold air mass has reestablished itself over Nunavut. So that warm wave we had a couple weeks ago, that's gone and replaced by some very typical air for this time of year. However, over Greenland, we've seen some 60s. Let me see if I can pull that map up further. That's probably about as far as I can get it, but you can see 60s here and there. That's the cold side of Greenland. We've got 60 degrees there, and some 60s down the coast. We've got almost 70 there. I think that's going to be near Nuuk, the capital, somewhere in that region. They had a record ice melt back on Tuesday. I was just reading that on the internet, but there it is. The amount of Greenland ice that melted on Tuesday could cover Florida in 2 inches of water. And they had another example of that back in 2019 take place. So we're not going to focus on that too much, but I will take you to the GFS for Tuesday. This is the 850 millibar temperature anomaly. This is kind of a measure of temperatures up at 5,000 feet MSL. So going back to Tuesday, we have that southerly flow coming up from Newfoundland, and we've had multiple instances of temperatures in the 70s and 80s in Newfoundland and Labrador. We don't have that right now, but earlier we did, and some of that air was carried north and helping to warm Greenland. And we can just check out the week going into Thursday and Friday. It looks like that warmth has settled down a little bit, but looks like another little batch of warm air heading up into that region. And then for next week, looks like things return to seasonal normals once again. And bringing that up to today's run, yeah, there's that chunk of cold air in the Great Lakes. So we're looking at this morning with the current run, that's that cold front heading into the northeast U.S., and we can see it's warming up once again in British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. And what's going to happen over the weekend? Looks like more warm weather for British Columbia, spreading into Alberta early next week, and into the Northwest Territories and Saskatchewan before this next cold front dives south. And there's some pretty hefty cold air back behind that next Wednesday. And let's just see how things play out. Good punch of cold air into the Hudson Bay region, but not making it very far south. So some of that hot air stays over southern Canada, the prairies, and it just kind of stays warm for several days, and then maybe around the 8th of August, things start to cool down once again. But some of that hot air shifts down into the northern plains, and this is a good indication right here, some cold air. Where did that come from? Let's go backwards. Yeah, that little low out there helped us out. So that's where we're at. We just covered that low earlier. You can see that spiral around a couple times and then get dumped into the northwestern U.S. So kind of a long circuitous path there, but eventually it does cool things off. Look at that, heading right into the deserts around Saturday, a week from now. Now the tropics, those are looking pretty good. In fact, let's go to the 500 millibar chart. And we're going to focus a little bit more on the U.S. 594 decameter height contour. That's pretty high for this time of year. That's pretty high for any time of year. That high centered in Kansas, producing somewhat of a fair weather dome in that region. See if I can bring up a skew-t. No, I can't for some reason. It doesn't work with the North American graphic. But anyway, you can see that easterly flow coming into Texas and indirectly into the southwestern states. Now, what's going to happen over the next week? Not much change until right around Sunday. It looks like the high kind of shifts back into the Four Corners area. The easterly flow breaks down, and we start opening up northwesterly flow into the Mississippi River Valley. So that means possibly the reappearance of northwesterly flow storms. And that's assuming that we are still bringing up tropical air from the Gulf. Very strong troughing in the southeastern U.S., that northwesterly flow leading into that trough, and we're pretty much devoid of any easterly flow in the Gulf, which means if we did get a tropical disturbance developing in this region, it should get picked up pretty quickly by those westerlies. And let's see, cutoff low in Kentucky and Tennessee for later next week. That kind of rotates around, produces some showers and storms in that region, and gradually opens up around the weekend next week. And here comes the next trough, some cool air heading inland, so this is a good change for that part of the country. That's the 5-day outlook from the National Hurricane Center. Very surprising for August, but, we'll take it. I don't think we need all that damage and rain. And SPC a little bit different, showing that slight risk over Omaha with a MCS up to the north that's probably in the dissipating stages. There's the visible satellite loop this afternoon, showing the southerly flow pulling up into that area, coming up through Kansas, some moist, warm air, and we see a definite contrast between the cloud field up north. This is more in the realm of transverse bands. You see those bands right there kind of paralleling the shear vector through that region in the lower atmosphere. That's kind of a combination between the easterly flow in the low levels and the south to southeasterly flow aloft, and the average of that kind of gives us that kind of banding right there, and that's indicative of the warm front being just to the south. So this is kind of a good setup for thunderstorms to develop right through this area. And we do have some cirrus flowing in that could interfere a little bit with convective initiation. Taking a quick look at the high-resolution rapid refresh model. This is about the current time, and running that forward, you can see a couple specks of convection get going south of Grand Island, and those don't really do much. Some more specks around Kansas City, well, lasting a couple of hours at least. And then we have the main cluster coming together up in the Sand Hills region. And those come southeastward during the overnight hours. So at this time, we are seeing a few towers in southeastern Nebraska, maybe 1 weak storm. It remains to be seen whether that holds together. The high-resolution model, not picking up on that convection, but we're not even sure that it's deep convection yet, and it's not that great for forecasting initiation. The soundings do show a cap and a little bit of dry air up above 5,000, which may get entrained into those updrafts. And the LCLs, those are a little bit high, close to 2 kilometers. So there are some things working against afternoon convection today. But as we go into tonight, we can see that MCS developing, coming into Omaha after midnight, and pretty good MCS moving eastward through the Corn Belt. The National Drought Monitor shows that the western Corn Belt has been enduring some drought conditions, so they certainly need what they can get. The ECMWF Extreme Forecast Index for next week, Sunday and Monday, shows that we're going to have a heat wave setting in the southeastern, or I should say the eastern Mediterranean. Now, yesterday it did get very warm in that area. Temperatures were up near 100 in Athens, Thessaloniki, and one of the cities on the west coast there. And unfortunately, we're going to hear about this a lot next week, because you can see as we run this through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that heat wave is basically just sitting over that area. Greece, Turkey, Cairo, even Cyprus are all going to see above average temperatures, which is bad news for them. By contrast, here in the North American region, a lot of the heat will be concentrated up there in the northwestern U.S. and British Columbia. We're expecting 107 tomorrow at Omak, which will tie the record for the date, and 103 at Spokane, which will also tie the record for the date. Fortunately, no 120s foreseen. Some cooler weather in the northeastern U.S., Albany expected to get down to 48, which will come close to the records, and lots of 50s in that part of the country over the weekend. And looks like kind of a mild pattern going into early next week. You can see some of these cool readings spreading down south. This is going to be slightly cooler than average. So that's always good to see, and that's going to be ahead of that front, which is pushing south into the Gulf Coast region, and we talked about that back on Wednesday. And then going into the end of next week, no big surprises. Things actually look pretty decent. So it should be kind of a slow week there. And then just a quick look for Asia. Fortunately, it looks like we're done with the flooding rains in China, so that will give them a chance to recover. However, heat being expected in the Sea of Japan area, and that will persist for much of the week, as we can see there, going into late next week. And that's about all I got for this edition of Forecast Lab. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you all have a great weekend. We will be back on Monday for the Patreon supporters, and we'll see everybody else here on Wednesday. Have a great one. Bye-bye.